Now, in keeping to our schedule of book reviews, and especially on the topic of Nepal, we are approaching the end of the books that I'm familiar with that have to do with Kathmandu Valley or Nepal more in general, and specifically art and architecture rather than religious context. Now, there's a book that I actually was not aware of because it wasn't translated into English, and it's called The Buddhist Holy Sites of Nepal, and it's written by Rinchen Dharlo, and the English version comes out of the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives, and the first edition was in 2020. Now, this book has been around in a shorter, unupdated version, Tibetan only, and that was from I believe it was the mid to late 70s when it was first published. But the first English publication is 2020. Now, in this publication, we have approximately 60 sites that are discussed, and they're from all across Nepal. Now, of course, there's certain areas that are going to be missing that are hard to get to, and it can't really cover everything. We're looking at 60 sites, and many of them are of the Kathmandu Valley. Now, this book is unique. It's very different from the others. Now, several of the others are by Keith Dowman, and we've talked about one or two of them already. But this book is unique because it's coming much more from a Tibetan point of view. It also used Tibetan sources. It used various texts and biographies from 17th century onwards. I think the fifth Dalai Lama is mentioned, and others are mentioned as well. And also the Kamtrul Rinpoche guide to Nepal and the Kathmandu Valley was used. Now, what makes this more unique than a number of the other texts is it's using really Tibetan sources, and it's looking from a Tibetan eye, and it's also looking at different more obscure places like the Ralotsawa caves over by the cutting of the mountain when Manjushri let the water out from the lake that was Kathmandu Valley. It was, I guess, Kathmandu Lake at one time, but it had another name. Going into detail about the Goraknath and Ralotsawa caves is really, really fascinating because it's from a Tibetan point of view. And I've heard these stories for decades, but I'm hearing a different version than I've heard over the years. But there's many, many places that are discussed and talked about, and it's in decades past, often you would get more of a Newar Buddhist point of view or a Hindu point of view on a site, but now we're getting primarily a Buddhist point of view and a Tibetan Buddhist point of view. Really fascinating. It means that Rinchen Dharlo's work has to be compared against the other authors who have come out with publications on the Kathmandu Valley and compare the stories. And from my side, there's actually stories that are not mentioned in Keith Dowman's publications or others, which I have heard, which relate to these sites and the history of these sites, such as Guyeshwari. Where did the gold come from in Guyeshwari? The yogini's water, the mother goddess's water, and then there's a lot of gold, actual real gold. And none of these books will talk about how the gold comes from the town and monastery of Sakya and taken by a Nepali army, and then taken and partially used at Guyeshwari to decorate the shrine and the spring with the water coming out. But there's many, many other stories where there's all kinds of parts that are not told that I have heard in passing. So it's just really an amazing thing that there's just so many stories and so much history that it's so difficult to write it all down for the Kathmandu Valley. But still, we still have 2 more books to go. This is The Buddhist Holy Sites of Nepal by Rinchen Dharlo. First English translation and updated version came out from Library of Tibetan Works and Archives in 2020. And we'll leave it there. You can press like, you can subscribe, you can join HAR on Patreon, and you can also make a donation on the homepage of Himalayan Art Resources.